Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me. We're going to try this lesson one more time today. Throughout the lessons today, I'm going to ask you to answer some questions. And so they're going to be things you're going to write down on a piece of paper and then turn in at the end of class. So you should be watching this. I really, really want to encourage you that those of you that did not do your Ed puzzle yesterday, it must be done today. After that, there will be no more points available. So let's make sure we get our work done while I'm gone. So our first big idea we're going to talk about today is that Mexico is a really large country with different natural environments in its northern, central, and southern regions. So we divide Mexico into three regions: north, south, and middle. Their physical features include plateaus, mountains, and lowlands. That means it's low elevation. They have deserts, tropical forest, and cool highlands. That means it's high elevations like mountains. And they have lots of natural resources, just like Canada: oil, silver, gold, and a lot of forestry as well. So Mexico shares a long border with the southern United States. So on the southern part, you've got the Rio Bravo, which in the United States we call this the Rio Grande, and it runs along part of the border. The Rio Bravo is one of Mexico's few major rivers. They do not have a lot of rivers in Mexico. So most of the places we've studied, lots of waterways. Mexico doesn't have that many. So the bodies of water that they do have on the west coast of Mexico is the Pacific Ocean, and then the Gulf of Mexico is in the east. Stretching south from northern Mexico is a peninsula. That means it's a piece of land surrounded by water on three sides, and we call that Baja California. And then you have the Yucatan Peninsula, which separates the Gulf of Mexico from the Caribbean Sea. The Yucatan Peninsula is where like Cancun is. A lot of people vacation there. So it's a really popular spot. Most of the interior is a region called the Mexican Plateau. But there are two mountain ranges: the Sierra Madre Oriental in the east and the Sierra Madre Occidental in the west. The Sierra Madre stands for Mother Range. The Valley of Mexico, where Mexico City, their largest city, is located, lies between these two ranges in the south. And Mexico has to deal with two major issues from Mother Nature. The first is they've got a lot of volcanoes and they have to deal with volcanic eruptions. And then they have earthquakes also as a threat to the region. So the coastal lowlands, when we talk about lowlands, we're talking about areas that slope downward to the coast where the water is from the mountains in central Mexico. So the Gulf coastal plain is really wide, it's really flat, and it has amazing soil so that they can grow a lot of different crops. The Yucatan Peninsula is mostly flat. Erosion of limestone has created caves and sinkholes that are often filled with water. When I went to Mexico, we got to go into these forests. It would be 90 degrees, 100 degrees, and then you climb down into these caves where they're filled with water, and you can do cave swimming and cave diving, which is a pretty cool experience. So the first question you're going to answer on your piece of paper: what two bodies of water border Mexico? So what did I just talk about? I'm going to give you guys a second to answer that. You can pause the video if you need more time. Second question I want you to answer, number 2: what two acts of Mother Nature threaten the region where Mexico is located? All right, so our main idea too is that Mexico's climate and vegetation include deserts, tropical forest, and those cool highlands. There's such a variety of climates in Mexico. You go from areas that are super hot to areas that are very rainy to areas that are chillier. So that allows for them to have different vegetation, meaning different plants and things that are going to grow there. The change in elevation can also be really close to one another. So you can drive only 20 miles and go from an area that is really hot to an area that's much, much cooler, or into a forest. The Mexican Plateau, which is that central area, has very cool temperatures. The southern coastal areas have very warm temperatures and summer rainy seasons that support that tropical forest, and that covers about 25% of Mexico. And then you have the climate in the Yucatan Peninsula, which is hot and dry, and that supports what we call scrub forest. So that's going to be more of kind of that image in your head of tumbleweeds and things, drier plants that are going to be located there. Most of northern Mexico is dry and made up of deserts and grasslands. So the border with the United States, right across the Rio Grande, is going to mainly be deserts and grasslands. So not a lot of vegetation. It's not a place you can live and support yourself or grow anything. So it's a difficult area in that northern Mexican region. So question number 3, which region has the coolest temperatures? And remember, if I'm moving too fast, you can always pause your video. Main idea number 3 is the natural resources you find in Mexico. So it includes oil, silver, gold, and a lot of really pretty landscapes. The southern and coastal regions have the oil. Mexico's mines give them gold, silver, copper, lead, zinc. So very similar to Canada, that they've got really good natural resources. And Mexico actually produces more silver than any other country in the world. So if you go down to any of the states in the United States that are right on the border, you're good, like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, there's a huge industry for silver jewelry there. All right, so what natural resources does Mexico have more than any other nation in the world? You should remember, because I just told you. That's question 4. So let's look at their history just a little bit. Native American cultures are the first group that was ever in Mexico. And then we have the Spanish that's going to come in and colonize that area, and that's really going to change it. So the earliest groups, the very first groups that were in Mexico, were the Olmec, the Mayan, and the Aztec. Mexico's period is later on when Spain comes in and takes over parts of Mexico. And so what you have today is this blending of the native cultures, the Olmec, the Mayan, and the Aztec blending with the Spanish culture, and creating Mexico's kind of unique customs and traditions. Early cultures, the Olmec, the Mayan, and the Aztec, are from thousands of years ago. As early as 5,000 years ago, we know that they were growing beans, peppers, squash, and they domesticated corn. And farming allowed them to build the very first settlements in America. So at that time, it was not America yet. There was no such thing. So the southern parts of the United States, where we looked at in our last unit, were actually all part of Mexico then. All right, so the Olmec, they lived in small villages around 1500 BC. They settled in the southern coast, and they built temples and giant statues. The Mayan built big cities in Mexico, and they were more centrally located between 250 and 900 AD. They built stone temples. They are the ones who developed a calendar, the Mayan calendar. You might have heard of that before. And they kept written records that don't really tell us why their entire civilization collapsed and disappeared. And then last was the Aztec. They moved in from the north. They built a great capital on an island in 1325, and they established an empire in Mexico. And that allowed them to obtain new lands, taxes, and captives to sacrifice through the war. So the main thing you want to remember is the Olmec were in the southern part, Mayan were in the middle, Aztec were in the north. So from that information, and this should be question 5, not question 4, which group developed a calendar? The Olmec, the Mayan, or the Aztec? And which group lived in small villages? What group established an empire? And I know the numbers are off, guys, but that's okay. Mexico then comes into a time period where the Spanish are going to colonize. Colonize means they're going to come over and take control. And then it's going to struggle with its independence. After the Spanish come in, pretty much all the way up until recently, they're trying to kind of fight off that colonization idea. Despite the fact that the Aztec Empire was huge and had a lot of power, it didn't last long after Cortez arrived with his 600 Spanish soldiers. They had better weapons and they had horses, but really the most important thing the Spanish had was diseases. The Aztec did not have an immunity to smallpox. So just like we're dealing with COVID and what we've dealt with the plague later on in history, when you bring a new disease into a civilization or into a society, they don't have an immunity to it, and the entire Aztec empire is going to collapse because of the disease smallpox. After the conquest, the Spanish are going to separate people. They're going to decide that they're going to separate people based on the color of their skin. So the mestizos are people of mixed European and American Indian ancestry. So it's the Europeans that came over to the Americas and married Native Americans. Mulattoes are people of mixed European and African descent. Africans and American Indians also intermarried. The Roman Catholic Church is going to become a humongous influence in Mexico. The Spanish bring Roman Catholic over with them, and they either force conversion or some people do choose that. And Mexico is one of the most Catholic countries in the entire world. The church is going to rule over all of northern Mexico, which is the area right near the United States. They'll have missions, they'll have outposts, and priests even learned the native languages of the American Indians so they could convert them to Catholicism. All right, what disease did the Spanish bring that wiped out the Aztec? The Spanish wanted to search for gold and silver. They heard that Mexico had all of these great natural resources. The American Indians and the enslaved Africans are going to be forced to labor in the mines for the Spanish. And as a result, thousands more are going to die from being overworked and from the diseases we talked about earlier. The Spanish monarch, meaning the king or queen, whoever was in charge in Spain at the time, granted haciendas, or huge expanses or farms, ranch land, to some of the Spanish people, where they then forced the American Indians and Africans to work on their haciendas in order to become wealthy. Spain rules Mexico for about 300 years. Miguel Hidalgo, who's a Catholic priest, is going to help lead the revolt against Spain. He was killed in 1811, but Mexico did win their independence about 10 years later in 1821. As time goes on, they win their independence, but then Mexico is going to struggle a little bit more. Texas is going to break away 15 years later. Texas becomes its own country. Eventually, it becomes part of the United States, but it breaks away from Mexico first, and that's the result of the Mexican-American War. And when that Mexican-American War happens, half of Mexico is going to be lost to the United States. In the mid-1800s, so just over 200 years ago, we have Benito Juarez, who helps Mexico survive a French invasion and reduce the privileges of the church. So the church loses a little bit of power in Mexico. In the early 1900s, about 100 years ago, hacienda owners and foreign companies had a lot of influence. But then we have a Mexican Revolution in 1910 to 1920, resulting in land reform, which means that they're not going to allow these big companies and these really rich guys to have all the land anymore. So some of the things that we know and the traditions that we have in Mexico today, most Mexicans speak Spanish. About 90% of Mexico is Roman Catholic. Many people, though, in Mexico do speak an American Indian language that ties to their ethnic group, and they identify as a Native American in that culture. And then we have Mexicans who have a unique practice that results from mixing those two cultures. For example, Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead to remember their dead ancestors, and when I get back, we're going to talk about the Day of the Dead in much more detail. This holiday is held on All Souls Day, which is a Catholic holiday. But instead of it being Catholic beliefs, it's more reflective of Native customs and beliefs. So Mexico today has 4 cultural regions that all play a part in their country's government and economy. Mexico is technically a democracy, and they've had the same party ruling for 71 years. So in the United States, we have Republicans, we have Democrats. In Mexico, they have a party that has not lost an election in 71 years. A different political party came to power in 2000 when Fox was elected president, but they've had a lot of challenges in Mexico. They owe a lot of money to foreign banks that are in other countries. They are faced with a lot of unemployment, and the unemployment is a result of what we call inflation. You've probably heard of this word before, but it doesn't make a lot of sense if you've never kind of understood it. It means when something has the cost or the price go up. If, let's say, they suddenly started charging all of us $10 for milk, it means that less of us are going to be able to afford it, and therefore we stop buying it. But then that means that the milk company has to raise the prices even more, or they have to lay off people. So as you see all these prices spiking up, more people get laid off, which leaves more unemployment, which means people can't buy products, which makes more companies lay off. So it's just this vicious cycle that's really, really difficult to get out of. Now, we do have this free trade agreement called NAFTA, where Canada, the United States, and Mexico are trying to find ways to have trade easier between the three groups so that they can all benefit from it. Because we know the United States and Canada are very wealthy countries. So it should stand to reason that if Mexico is just south of that, that they should be able to build their economy stronger based on their trade with these two countries. So what do people do in Mexico for jobs? So agriculture is a very big part of the jobs in Mexico. Farms have long been a part of Mexico history. Only about 12% of the land, though, is able to be farmed. And they practice something called slash and burn, where they burn forest in order to clear land for planting. Farmers grow cash crops, crops that farmers can sell for a profit. Other industries include oil, mining, manufacturing, that means factories. And many foreign companies will build their factories in Mexico because the labor is cheaper there. And then also we have a lot of Mexican workers that come to the United States to look for jobs. Tourism is also a very big industry for Mexico. Going to Cancun, going to kind of beaches and hot spots in Cancun, but also tourists visit the Mayan and the Aztec monuments, which when I get back, I'll show you guys a ton of pictures from when I got to go visit those monuments. So name 2 challenges that Mexico faces as a developing country. And what is a cash crop? Mexico has 4 distinct cultural regions: Greater Mexico City, Central Mexico, Northern Mexico, and Southern Mexico. We're going to stop there for today, and we're going to finish up this one because it's a little bit longer on the next lesson. So be looking out for that. We're going to do that on Wednesday, and then Thursday will be our Kahoot on Mexico.